Fuck around, make my 40 pop.
Do you think there might be a chance of him getting other dojutsus now that he's 100% Otsutsuki? Alright, so this right here is actually a very, very good question. And I honestly think one of the biggest dojutsus that we could possibly assume Boruto could possibly get would of course be the Rinnegan, since Momoshiki himself actually had multiple Rinnegans. Not even in his first form, but also in the second form when he did actually absorb Momoshiki Otsutsuki as well. This right here would obviously lead a lot of people to actually believe, Boruto will most likely get a Rinnegan. Now, if you guys don't necessarily know, the rationale behind this is the fact that most of the Otsutsuki powers that Boruto will actually get is going to come from Momoshiki, similar to how most of the Otsutsuki abilities that Kawaki actually did get came from Ishiki Otsutsuki. Kawaki, on the other hand, actually did unlock a separate type of dojutsu that Ishiki Otsutsuki did actually have. The difference, however, Ishiki Otsutsuki had 2 dojutsus, and Kawaki ended up unlocking the unique dojutsu. Not to say that the Byakugan isn't necessarily good or anything like that, but we understand the Byakugan isn't necessarily as good as this other dojutsu that Ishiki Otsutsuki does actually have. In Boruto's case, he didn't necessarily unlock the Rinnegan, but he did actually unlock the Byakugan. There is definitely a possibility that in the future, Boruto can actually unlock the Rinnegan, but here's the thing, there is a caveat. If the abilities that Boruto is getting is coming from base Momoshiki, which I personally believe that's a little bit unlikely, but hypothetically, if he was getting his abilities from the base Momoshiki, we don't fully know if Momoshiki actually unlocked the Rinnegans on his hands, or if Momoshiki actually did implant the Rinnegans in his hands. For example, we understand that Kakashi, if he does have a child, hopefully he does in the future, but if he does have a child, he obviously won't necessarily pass on his Sharingan, mainly because the Sharingan wasn't necessarily his, it didn't necessarily come from his own DNA. But hypothetically, if an Uchiha member like Sasuke were to have a kid, of course their child, because the Sharingan is in Sasuke's DNA, that child would also have the Sharingan as well. So it really depends if Momoshiki got the Rinnegan through normal means when he was in his base. However, when Momoshiki transformed into his final form state, he himself did actually unlock a Rinnegan on his forehead. Momoshiki, when he was in his base, didn't necessarily have a Rinnegan on his forehead, so we could possibly assume that, hey, Momoshiki unlocked that. So hypothetically, if Boruto was getting his power from the fused final form Momoshiki, it's definitely a high possibility that he will eventually get a Rinnegan. And of course, it would have to kind of be vice versa as well, even though I don't necessarily think that Kawaki would have much use for it, but Kawaki could also possibly unlock the Byakugan in the future because Ishiki Otsutsuki also had the Byakugan. And I believe I even touched on this in the video, because Boruto is now 100% Otsutsuki, it's probably a better chance that he'd be able to use the Jogen now than he was before, because of the fact that his body is more equipped to actually handle the Jogen. Momoshiki Otsutsuki back in Boruto episode 65 already confirmed that the Jogen was actually an Otsutsuki dojutsu. So understanding that Boruto is now 100% Otsutsuki, it would make sense that he'd have an easier time actually utilizing the Jogen. So hopefully you get to see that in the future. The next comment comes from Aijiyashi. They say, since Boruto doesn't look like an Otsutsuki, do you think it gives more credibility to Amado perhaps being an Otsutsuki? I think it definitely does, and to be honest, I don't even think that you need to see Boruto to kind of understand that. For example, we seen Jigen earlier on in the series, and he looked like more or less like a regular human being, but he was actually being controlled by an Otsutsuki member. And I'm pretty sure most of you guys understand the idea behind Amado possibly being an Otsutsuki member, but just to point a couple of things out, Amado essentially knows a lot about the Otsutsuki clan. Amado also has a bunch of high-tech ability that a lot of people think he probably got from the Otsutsuki clan, and not only that, Amado didn't necessarily give us a clear answer and proof upon how he did actually know a bunch of stuff about the Otsutsuki clan, and on top of that, it seems like he's the smartest guy in the series, so it kind of makes sense if he was actually an Otsutsuki member. But of course, when it comes to the advent of these characters, essentially human beings turning into quote-unquote Otsutsuki members, it of course opens the doors for Amado to potentially even be an Otsutsuki member. One of the things that we do know about Amado is that he's been extremely secretive and he withholds a lot of information. One of the things that Amado is still kind of withholding from Naruto and Sasuke is the fact that he himself actually does have a scientific dojutsu eye. This right here was actually found out from Ida when Ida was actually telling Code exactly how Code can actually lift his limiters. Not only that, Amado told no one that he actually did give Kawaki his carbon seal back, and there's just a bunch of things that Amado isn't necessarily being 100% truthful of. So of course, if later on we find out that Amado wasn't necessarily truthful about being a quote-unquote human being, or no one really asked him so he didn't necessarily say anything, it wouldn't necessarily be a big surprise. Alright, the last comment comes from Stark. I can't necessarily talk about all of them. He listed like 6 predictions, so I'll probably pick like 2 or 3 or something like that. So, alright, the first one, I think Boruto gets the scar from attacking Damon. That's definitely a possibility. One of the things that I definitely have to say though is I'm not necessarily sure if Boruto has an ability to actually slash an eye like that. Something that's delicate to not necessarily fully gouge out an eye, and of course something sharp enough to actually leave a mark. I'm not sure what Boruto has in his repertoire, so this right here could definitely possibly be in the future when Boruto learns a little bit of swordsmanship, and then of course he tries to hit Damon with his sword and then ends up slicing himself. That's 100% a possibility. I still do believe, I think that Boruto's probably going to get it in battle fighting against another character that wants to take out his Jogan. I think that right there is probably going to be the most realistic. The reason why I say that is of course the scars over Boruto's Jogan eye, the way that the Jogan has been being hyped up by the Boruto writers, it would make sense for an enemy to try to take out Boruto's Jogan. Now next one, part 2, Kawaki kills full power Cold. I think this right here is definitely a possibility. Kawaki and Cold, they definitely have a dynamic as to where Cold is always like a little bit lesser than Kawaki. For example, Momoshiki Otsutsuki picked Kawaki over Cold, not necessarily because he liked Kawaki over Cold, but just because of the sheer fact that Kawaki's body matched a lot better with the Karma Seal. But not only that, the love of Cold's life right now, Ida, is essentially picking Kawaki over Cold. Kawaki himself was the one to actually get most of the abilities that Momoshiki Otsutsuki actually did have, even though Cold kind of still worships Momoshiki Otsutsuki. So it's always been a dynamic between Kawaki and Cold, which would kind of make it seem like, hey, Kawaki's probably going to be the one to finish off Cold for good. So I definitely do like that idea. Now I'm just going to give another one. Sasuke dies analyzing Damon's abilities and sends a message to Boruto. I don't like that, to be honest. The reason why I don't like that is because it mimics Jiraiya too much, and not only that, Sasuke is not like Jiraiya. I think if Sasuke was in Jiraiya's situation, Sasuke would have left. Not saying that Sasuke back then, 16 years old, hothead Sasuke, but regular Sasuke, adult Sasuke, if he was in Jiraiya's position, he would have left. He'd understand that his life was a little bit more valuable than just confirming a hypothesis. And I think he'd probably just took that hypothesis back and say, hey, this right here is probably his ability. And we kind of seen Sasuke be confronted with a similar situation like this, where he essentially went to Momoshiki Otsutsuki's dimension, seen Jigen pull up to the dimension, absorb chakra from a 10 tails, and of course dip out the dimension. And Sasuke didn't necessarily do anything and try to actually attack Jigen. So we kind of seen Sasuke in this situation. So because of that, I'm going to have to say, nah, I don't think that Sasuke would do that, even though I think that a lot of people kind of like that death from Sasuke and kind of think it's worthy. But let me know what you guys think about these in the comment section below, and of course leave some of your comments down below. Hopefully I'll try to do this every single week, but it's been your boy Bar B, and we out.
It's a knife.